Kristen shot JR. And if you're old enough to get that reference, you don't need me to warn you about the rest of the spoilers coming up. And if you're not old enough to get that reference, sorry about the Dallas spoiler? Can you even watch Dallas anywhere?
Today we meet the fabulous Globetrotters.
On the way to an island picnic, the gang run out of gas, and while inexplicably searching for some in an abandoned house, once again meet the Harlem Globetrotters. Together they wind up on a spooky island, no, not that one, where the restful night the Globetrotters need for a big game the following day is constantly interrupted by supernatural shenanigans. By the way, while working on this script, I was constantly finding myself typing Ghostbusters instead of Globetrotters. So if any of those happen to slip by, I'm asking you to give me just a little slack. Looking to beat the Globetrotters at their next basketball game against the Ocean City Scorpions, the rival team's owner, coach, and trainer conspire to keep Meadowlark, Curly, and the rest awake all night so they'll be too tired to perform well the following day. They do so by tricking the Globetrotters onto a deserted island and employing various methods to sabotage...
Sabotage? How? When?
...their sleep. This is another Scooby villain scheme that's difficult to rate because it's difficult to determine whether it was worth it for the bad guys. If talking about a hidden treasure, stolen money, or even a real estate swindle, the value is right there on the surface. But in schemes involving ego or revenge, putting a tangible dollar amount on the crime isn't always possible. In Buck Master's case, for example, where he tried to win a dog show by abducting his competitors, an argument could be made that there was at least some financial motivation apart from his pride. Whereas in the case of Carl the stuntman, he tried shutting down the movie shoot that hired him due to jealousy over not playing the lead in the film. This was not only not a financial incentive, but if the film shoot got canceled, it could have conceivably lost him money. Fucking Carl the stuntman. In the situation presented here, the ultimate goal of the Scorpion team leaders is to win a single basketball game. It's only ever described in the episode as a big game, and never as a championship or other significant contest that would net the owners a big haul. Of course, the game could be part of a finals to determine who would be chosen for a tourney, but that's never revealed. The thing is, the Globetrotters were never part of any basketball association. By the time of this episode, they were only ever an exhibition team competing as entertainers rather than as a serious sports franchise, which is why they get away with all the trick shots and crazy court antics. So what would make this game so important that the owner of the Scorpions himself would resort to underhanded tactics? The basketball game is going to be held at Ocean City. Whenever a real location is mentioned in the Scooby-Doo universe, it's usually a famous one that leaves no doubt as to its whereabouts. At this point, the gang has been to places like San Francisco, Hollywood, and Nashville, where the setting was explicitly stated. Most other times, though, they visit rural areas that could be anywhere in the country. Ocean City is a generic name that sounds like it was made up by the writers to evoke a location near the sea to account for the two islands mentioned in the episode, while also being large enough to host a professional basketball game. However, there is a real Ocean City in New Jersey, and if the events of this episode could be placed in that real-life setting, it's less than an hour away from Atlantic City. Though it would be 5 years after this episode aired that Atlantic City's famous casinos would be legalized, this didn't stop organized crime from operating their own illegal gambling operations at the time. Is it possible that the Scorpions owner and his cohorts were under orders by the Atlantic City mob to fix the Globetrotters game? This wouldn't be the only time in early 1970s fiction that the mob put innocent people in danger at an island location. In Peter Benchley's original Jaws novel, the main reason Mayor Vaughn wanted to keep the beaches open despite all the shark attacks was because the mafia owned a lot of real estate there and wanted to protect their investment. If we proceed from this premise that the Scorpions' owner, coach, and trainer were operating under mob orders, directly or indirectly, why did they resort to such a convoluted scheme of tricking the Globetrotters to a deserted island to keep them up all night?
All night.
Couldn't they have used other methods to get the Globetrotters to throw the game? threats would likely not have been that effective, considering in real life the Globetrotters were brave enough to play a sport that had been dominated by white players for decades. In fact, the Globetrotters were part of the reason for black players having succeeded in integrating the sport despite the racism stacked against them. Perhaps that's why Granny and Dribbles weren't with them on this tour. Did the Globetrotters purposely leave their elderly manager and animal mascot behind to keep them out of danger from potential mob kidnappers? Except, look who's driving the Globetrotters bus and riding in the back. Someone really needs to tell that animator to pay attention to the production notes. If threats wouldn't work, then why not just keep the Globetrotters from playing at all? The Scorpions' management successfully stranded the team on the deserted island. Why not just take the boat and leave them there until after the game is forfeited? Again, probably gambling. If a game is canceled or forfeited, bookies would likely be forced to refund any bets made. In addition, side bets like covering the spread would require the game being played. And don't say that nobody would ever bet on a Globetrotters game in the first place, because there's precedent.
Let me get this straight. You took all the money you made franchising your name and bet it against the Harlem Globetrotters?
I thought the generals were due. He's spinning the ball on his finger. Just take it. Take the ball. That game was fixed. They were using a freaking ladder, for God's sake.
Without knowing why the rival owner, coach, and trainer resorted to such desperate acts to win, it's impossible to determine with absolute certainty if the scheme was worth it. However, just the fact that they were this desperate to handicap the Globetrotters is enough to convince me they had to have had reasons over and above simple bragging rights. So they get a 2 out of 5 for the design.
Imagine going to all this trouble just to make the Globetrotters too sleepy tomorrow to win the game.
I briefly considered giving them a 3 out of 5, but when even Daphne thinks your plan is stupid, that's going to cost you. So far, this has easily been the ugliest episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies I've covered so far. And when you wake up to this in the mirror every morning, you become an expert on ugliness. The animation is so god-awful in parts, it looks like a poorly rendered fan film. It shows how stretched Hanna-Barbera was during this period in the studio's history, both to meet the demands of the network for content and their absolute determination not to hire enough staff to cover their needs. But the ugliness doesn't stop at the animation, because the writing is just the worst. And at no point is this more apparent than trying to determine what the villains' costumes were in this episode.
Uh-oh! Look! Another ship's wheel! With 2 hands on it.
For starters, we don't see anything close to a costume until close to the 15-minute mark when Fred, Daphne, and Velma see disembodied hands steering the boat toward Haunted Island. Up to that point, the only time we saw anything of the villains was when one of them was peeking through some holes in a wall and several moments of hands reaching from out of shot.
Stay with us, Shag.
What else?
Let go of my waist, Scooby. Blast off!
Where did that statue come from? It wasn't on the plinth when Shaggy walked by. Regardless, during most of the episode, anything supernatural shown is usually a prop, like the fully articulated, glowing and floating native statues, which somehow also laugh after grabbing Shaggy and Scooby, a disembodied hand, and several moving statues, including one that could be a man in a suit, except none of the villains are skinny enough to match that body type. And before you ask, that is not Thing from the Addams Family, because he's a good guy. Good hand.
Finish saying your prayers, Scooby?
Uh-huh.
A bed canopy also somehow turns into a floating ghost, but wasn't scary enough to make Shaggy or Scooby do more than hide under their blanket.
We better pray some more.
I have to say, it's weird seeing Shaggy and Scooby praying. Sure, it's common for cartoon characters to clasp their hands together and whimper as they're about to be hit by some inevitable danger, but to actually have them kneeling by the bed to pray is unsettling. They never did that before in any of the other episodes that show them preparing for sleep.
Night, Bobby Joe, Gip, Fab, Metallark, and Curly.
Night, Fab, Curly, Geese, Metallark, and...
Knock it off, fellas. One big good night all is enough.
Good night,
all.
This might be a reference to The Waltons, a TV show that was airing at the time this episode was produced. The show was about a poor mountain family during the Great Depression, and each episode ended with them saying goodnight to each other like this. But setting that aside, how can anyone sleep barefooted like that with their feet outside the cover?
Someone's feet are ice cold. Ouch! One of you forgot to cut his toenails.
Later, there's another villain appearance using a suit of armor. But was that an outfit or a prop? First of all, prop or not, how did the suit of armor get into the bed in the first place when it was filled with the Globetrotters? Wait, even before that, why were the Globetrotters all sleeping in the same bed anyway when the mansion had all those rooms? Okay, putting all that aside, how did Curly end up wearing the armor? And if the villain escaped through a trapdoor under the bed, how did he make it through that when the bed had to split in half to access the door in the first place? Cartoon physics, sure, but this is just the laziest of writing. If I had seen this episode at the time it first aired, even one-year-old me would have found this insulting to my intelligence. The next ghostly appearances were a gaseous cloud knitting while sitting in a rocking chair and a floating female ghost outside Shaggy and Scooby's bedroom window. A ghost, incidentally, that was just another reused model, this time from the second Don Knotts episode.
Lucky thing we always sleep with our basketballs under the bed.
There were no basketballs seen in the bed at any point before this. You know, considering how the Globetrotters are able to produce basketballs seemingly by magic, I like the Futurama idea that the players are actually extraterrestrial aliens from another planet because it would take otherworld technology to teleport basketballs like these guys do.
If we don't get out of here, there won't be a tomorrow.
After falling down a shaft under their bed that was clearly far deeper than the second story they were in, the Globetrotters find themselves trapped in a library where they are attacked by glowing, floating books.
Let me in! Let me in! Give me a boost. Will you stop shaking? And be quiet and hold still. Hey! That's better. Now, can you raise me higher?
After getting locked outside, Shaggy attempts to regain entry by being boosted by Scooby, but instead finds himself lifted by a floating ghost. This is clearly not a projection, as Shaggy is standing on it. Since this is a prop and not a man wearing a sheet, I won't ding the villains for this. Dressing up as a ghost by wearing a sheet. Failing to make entry that way, Shaggy and Scooby attempt to pole vault, only to be foiled by a tree, possibly a villain in disguise?
Now let's follow them.
Finally, the gang and Globetrotters follow two pairs of glowing hands and feet that lead them to the villain's hideout on the island.
They don't look like ghosts to me.
They are literally glowing and just faded in from complete transparency. They sure look like ghosts to me.
Sorry.
Come on, Ray. Let's go.
This is really a grisly piece of animation here. Usually when a cartoon character is shown burned, they're just blackened a little or with smudges of gray. They drew Scooby with reddened and charred flesh.
It's the owner of the Scorpions.
And the coach and the trainer.
After Scooby inadvertently sacrifices at least 10% of his lower body skin, the villains are unmasked and found to be the Scorpions' owner, coach, and trainer. I took the time to go over each alleged supernatural occurrence because this is how the events on Haunted Island are explained.
Why, it's nothing but luminous paint, cardboard statues, wires, and sheets.
Everything was rigged to move automatically.
Including the boat that brought us here.
This is a completely half-assed explanation that doesn't come close to explaining all the supernatural events we saw. No episode in the new Scooby-Doo movies has made it so obvious that the producers could not have cared less about their audience and were clearly working under the assumption that kids are dumb and wouldn't appreciate just how little sense the show was making. The only time we ever see the villains in disguise is when they're wearing their all-white outfits for no good reason at the end. I say no good reason because they didn't use those outfits to scare the gang or the Globetrotters, despite adding glowing paint to them and somehow making everything but their hands and feet transparent. While I would usually give some credit for special effects, I can't do so here with good conscience because nothing explains the transparency. The villains simply fade in after walking past the gang and Globetrotters. There's never any explanation for that effect, and I really don't want to give credit to the bad guys when it's just bad writing or questionable decisions by the animators. I've touched before on the racism the Globetrotters would likely have seen had these Scooby adventures existed in the real-life early 1970s. But wow. The villains in this episode are literally men dressed in white masks and robes. There's a reason I didn't use them as my thumbnail, because it was already brought to my attention that the thumbnail I used in my last episode looked vaguely clannish, which was not my intention when I picked it. At the time, I was hemming and hawing between using the Minuteman or the Redcoat Ghost, and I chose the latter because I felt it was the more frightening of the two. There was no way I was going to make that mistake this time around. I mean, that even looks like a discarded Klan outfit. But then again, in a way, it's almost cathartic to see a villain dressed in white robes being manhandled by the Globetrotters here. Ultimately, I'm giving the Scorpions' owner, coach, and trainer an outfit score of 1 out of 5. Even setting aside the very poor optics of their white hoods and robes, the majority of their scheme relied on props rather than disguises. Let's look at the actions of the Globetrotters and the villains in chronological order.
Sure glad we found this deserted old shack. The cellar's a good place to practice in.
What the fuck? I know it's the early 1970s, and depending upon which part of the country they're in, a group of African American men might find it difficult to secure accommodations. But they're still the Harlem Globetrotters, and famous enough that renting a gym or even finding a YMCA shouldn't have been that difficult for them. Instead, the Globetrotters chose a random abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, which fortunately for them, happened to have a huge, well-lit basement in which they could practice for their big game the next day. At least one of the villains must have been following them because we see him spying through a couple of very conveniently placed holes in the wall.
We're in town for a big game tomorrow with the Ocean City Scorpions.
This old deserted shack looks like a good place to rest and practice.
No, it doesn't. Again, the local YMCA probably would have had the facilities for them to do both. Although as this was the 1970s, it might have also had other offerings that the Globetrotters may not have been interested in. Perhaps the Dirty Shack was the better option.
Okay, kids, your gas tank's full. And so's your picnic basket.
The Mystery Machine was completely out of gas. Assuming the van likely had a 20-gallon gas tank, just how much spare fuel were the Globetrotters carrying with them in their bus? After meeting the gang, the Globetrotters agreed to join them on a cruise to Picnic Island in order to rest up. The villains overheard their plans, and between the time it took for the Globetrotters to fill the Mystery Machine's gas tank and split their food with the gang, the Scorpion's owner, coach, and trainer had enough time to run ahead to switch the signs on the cruise ship, steal an abandoned tanker, and somehow get ahead of it to Haunted Island to rig the abandoned mansion with all their ghost equipment. Ghost equipment that clearly uses electricity, which means that the villains also had to have had planned ahead enough to make certain that the mansion had working utilities.
The captain will get us back to shore. What captain? That's me.
But you've never been to sea?
Meadowlark Lemon served in the U.S. Army in the early 1950s and was stationed in Austria and West Germany. It's likely he would have arrived by ship.
Someone else is in control of my ship.
Yeah, it's positively eerie.
Worse than that. That's mutiny, Mr. Christian. That's mutiny.
That's a reference to Mutiny on the Bounty, a story about rebellious sailors who stranded their captain at sea. So you may want to rethink that line, Captain Lemon.
I think we're being sea-jacked.
Is this the sea-jack?
What? Where to?
Haunted Island.
Haunted Island?
The writers probably meant to say the gang and the Globetrotters were being shanghaied, not sea-jacked. Being shanghaied is when you're forced on a boat against your will or under fraudulent conditions. Being sea-jacked is when someone takes control of a ship that doesn't belong to them. If anything, Meadowlark is the one doing the sea-jacking. There were so many aspects of this plan that required obscene levels of coincidence for it to work for the villains. First, that the Globetrotters would stop at an abandoned house to practice. Then that the Scooby Gang would run out of gas on the way to an island cruise. Then that the gang would search the same abandoned house for gas. Then that the gang would invite the Globetrotters to join them. Then that the Globetrotters would accept the invitation. Then that the cruise ship would leave before they arrive. Then that the villains would find a nearby abandoned tanker they could fool their victims into boarding. Then that the Globetrotters would assume control and accidentally ruin both their ability to steer the ship as well as to anchor it. All of these coincidences had to happen to get the Globetrotters to Haunted Island, where the villains just happened to have access to an abandoned mansion set up with special effects designed to keep the Globetrotters from falling asleep. All I can think of is that the Scorpion's owner, coach, and trainer had the mansion set up long before the Globetrotters arrived in town and had an elaborate plan set up to coerce the team to the island. But the Scooby Gang happened to arrive and somehow inadvertently replaced whatever the villain's original scheme was with an equally successful stream of coincidences. Speaking of the three villains, we see them at the next day's game, alert and smugly watching as the exhausted Globetrotters flounder about. The Scooby Gang were also wide awake. Yet all of them were up all night.
All night.
Why is it only the Globetrotters who were sleepy? As I said, this was an ugly, ugly episode.
He lost the ball. There's a high looping shot.
The sad part is, as sloppy as the writing was, the villain's initial scheme was entirely successful, at least when it comes to making the Globetrotters too sleepy to perform during the following day's game. The bad guys were caught in the end, but as seen, they were never arrested for their acts, despite arguably committing both kidnapping and attempted murder. Oh, did I forget to mention the attempted murder?
There's nothing like a little pizza to take our minds off this creepy ship.
I'm not sure what that object is, but my best guess is it's an aluminum porthole cover. If that's the case, a rough estimate would put its weight at a couple of 100 pounds. Speaking of pizza, Shaggy's head should have looked like one after that hit him. This was attempted murder and would have been successful if cartoon physics wasn't a thing. Winning a basketball game is not usually worth killing anyone, which only serves as possible further evidence of my theory about mob ties to the Scorpions team.
That's it, Scooby! Ice!
Of course, the villains are eventually thwarted by Shaggy's quick thinking of using ice to shock the Globetrotters awake enough to win the game. You know, if this was real life, when Shaggy mentioned ice being the cure for the Globetrotters' sleepiness, he probably would have meant a different kind of ice. This doesn't count as a joke about Shaggy being a pothead. This counts as a joke about Shaggy being a meth head. While too much of the villain's actions relied on coincidence and sloppy writing to work, if we focus on what we see on screen, their actions were effective. Their goal was to win the game by making the Globetrotters too sleepy to play, and they succeeded. The fact that they still lost the game at the end was through no fault of their own, as they could not have accounted for the random appearance of the Scooby Gang to foil their scheme. As much as I hated this nonsensical, ugly, poorly written, sloppy episode, objectively rating the bad guys' operation forces me to give them a 4 out of 5. This leaves the Scorpions' owner, coach, and trainer with a final due score of 2.7 out of 5.
Sneaking into our picnic basket. How could you stoop so low, Scooby?
Easy. Like this.
Next time we should keep our food in a safe.
With a Scooby-proof lock.
Why don't they already have that food safe? This is the second time this series that the episode begins with Scooby eating their lunch. At this point, can you even blame Scooby for eating their food if the gang won't take precautions to protect it from him? Also, what's that steering wheel attached to?
We're in luck. Look, there's an old shack. Maybe the owner has an extra can of gas.
Or a phone to call a filling station.
That is some stupid optimism. I can see why Fred and the rest think their food is safe with Shaggy and Scooby around.
Can I help it if I'm allergic to the creeps?
Come on, Shag. You can help me carry the gas.
How much gas is Fred planning on taking from that shack if he needs Shaggy's help to carry it?
Maybe it's a ghost.
It's probably just a mouse.
Ick! I'd rather it was a ghost.
God damn it, Daphne.
I say 3, 4. One, 2, 3.
Watching this episode may have been a turning point in the lives of a lot of prepubescent boys in 1973.
Sandwiches, marshmallows, fruit, and soda pop.
You forgot something.
What?
A padlock.
Well, I guess Shaggy's not that dumb. Although the rest of the gang are if they trust Shaggy with the key to their food supply.
All aboard for Picnic Island!
There is a picnic island in the Florida Keys near Tampa, but it's not really built for tourists like that. A guidebook says there's a single resident on the island who lives by himself in a moored houseboat. Which does sound like the perfect setting for a Scooby-Doo story.
Thumb Queen. Looks like an old tanker to me.
It's just a rusty old tub. Maybe it's named for a rusty old queen.
No, Bobby Joe, if they were going to be naming it after a rusty old queen, it would have been called the Queen Victoria. That's not the same gangway they used to board the ship. Also, where is it going? It's not a drawbridge. Ordinarily, a gangway would be affixed to the side of the ship or dragged down to the dock.
And look at this!
Yeah, no hair.
I mean, down there! Of course, it's only off the top of my head.
So is everything else.
But we don't have a mirror.
Oh, yes, we do.
There are an awful lot of ball jokes in this episode. If I was less mature, I'd almost be offended by them.
Oh, the statues!
Jesus Christ.
Shag really must be tired.
Symmetrical book stacking, just like the Philadelphia Man's Turbulence of 1947.
Let me in! Let me in! Let us out! Let us out!
Hey, where's my hot dogs?
Uh-oh. I think I know.
Is Scooby floating in midair next to the scoreboard? Where is Scooby's body?
He's not gonna trick me into volunteering this time.
All volunteers raise their hand. Hey, Curly, I think you're growing hair.
Really? Where?
I knew you'd volunteer. You're a born hero.
Fuck you, Metal Lark! In the episode I'm about to cover, one of the villains is based on a character from a Mark Twain story whose name contains what is generally considered a racial slur these days. As this villain is frequently mentioned, discussing him is going to be awkward for me. I'm going to do my best to avoid the name as much as practical and won't use the slur myself, but you may hear it occasionally spoken by some of the characters. Fucking 1970s.
Josie and the gang join us today.
Their shadows are there, but the animators forgot to put Shaggy and Scooby on the title card. Finding themselves lost on the way to a festival honoring Mark Twain, the Mystery Machine gets trapped on a broken dock. While taking shelter from a storm on a rundown riverboat, the gang meet Josie and the Pussycats, who were booked to perform on the vessel. Their performance, and possibly their lives, are put in danger by the ghosts of a Mississippi River pirate and a notorious literary scoundrel. Josie and the Pussycats are a comic book pop music band created in 1962 by Dan DiCarlo for Archie Comics. DiCarlo was an exceptional artist who essentially defined the house style used by that company for most of its existence. Odds are, if you picture Archie, Jughead, Betty, or Veronica in your head, it's in the style of Dan DiCarlo. Archie Comics thus owes a large portion of their success to Josie's creator, which of course they paid back by firing him after 4 decades with the company. They had a falling out due to a lawsuit DiCarlo filed over profits he felt he was owed for a big-budget film based on one of his creations. That creation being Josie and the Pussycats. This is depressingly similar to how the creators of Superman were treated poorly by DC Comics despite the billions the company made from that character. Except in this case, it would have been if Siegel and Schuster designed the look of every Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League, Teen Titans, and almost every other comic book produced by DC for over 60 years. In 1970, Hanna-Barbera secured the rights to produce an animated TV series based on Josie and the Pussycats, in which they essentially reworked the characters into another Scooby-Doo clone. In 1972, they produced a second series based on the property, only this time the musical group was trapped in outer space, and the series ended with them never actually making it back to Earth. Which kind of makes their appearance here in a Scooby episode a year later a little odd.
Oh, you're Alan!
And you're Valerie.
Right on. I'm Melody, I think.
Oh, Daphne is going to have some airhead competition. The villains in this episode are counterfeiter Jack Canna and his unnamed cohort. The two of them used the Dixie Queen, a dilapidated riverboat servicing the Mississippi, as a base of operations and dressed up as ghosts to scare others away. Canna also disguised himself as Captain Cannaby and used that identity to purchase a share of the riverboat from Johnny Briggs, an innocent patsy who wanted to fix up the Dixie Queen and run a legitimate business of ferrying tourists around the river.
How about 2 million?
Make it 3. I'm a big spender.
This was not a unique scheme, as counterfeiting was the goal of Pietro the Puppet Master from the first season of Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, though considering just how much fake money was found in the hold of the Dixie Queen, it was still lucrative and worth the risk of decades of jail time if caught. Canna and his partner printed the forged bills while safely hidden in a local cave system and used the riverboat to distribute them. This was a smart move, as the Dixie Queen would be able to move unobtrusively through the water. However, if their goal was to not draw attention to themselves, why would they have wanted to scare others away and keep the boat looking so run down? After all, which would draw less attention? A bustling riverboat filled with guests enjoying loud music as it steamed down the water, or a spooky derelict that barely looked seaworthy cruising the river with a couple of ghosts at the helm? The former wouldn't be enough to make the locals bat an eye if it was a regular occurrence. The latter would probably result in a few phone calls. Even if it wasn't allegedly haunted, others using the river wouldn't want an abandoned vessel floating around to cause potential hazards to navigation, so they would undoubtedly contact the authorities to come and salvage the ship. I'm giving Canna and his partner an operation score of 2 out of 5. Though facing steep penalties if caught, their scheme would be extremely profitable. However, they did more harm than good by dressing up as ghosts and trying to frighten tourists. Canna disguised himself as the ghost of a river pirate named Captain Scavenger, while his partner based his ghost on a Native American character from a Mark Twain novel.
In Mark Twain's story about Tom Sawyer, the villain's name was Injun Joe.
Oh, good grief. That happened 100 years ago. He wouldn't be around now.
No, but his ghost might.
Just like with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's appearance in Where Are You?, a fictional character is confusingly treated as a real-life figure here. Apparently, the events of Tom Sawyer really happened in the Scooby-Doo-niverse.
It's Injun Joe.
Who?
I suppose if they had to pick a problematically named character from the Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn series, the producers made the right choice here. The disguises themselves were nothing special. Befitting the typical Hanna-Barbera penny pinching, both are depicted as a single gray color and without special effects.
He just vanished. He just vanished.
Or rather, there were special effects, but they were never adequately explained. Would it have killed the producers to toss in a film projector somewhere on the Dixie Queen?
I can see right through him.
Injun Joe has to be an ectoplasmic spirit. How else could he be transparent?
He's not transparent. And this is the first time that any of the ghosts have been shown to glow.
Dawn.
Oh, so there is a projector involved. But only here, this one time. Never on the riverboat. Or rather, there is a very subtle hint that would probably be missed by most viewers.
He just vanished.
But I wonder what that humming sound meant.
Velma mentions hearing a humming, and sure enough, when the Captain Scavenger ghost disappears, if you listen for it, you can hear an unexplained noise that's partially obscured by the soundtrack. Later in the cave, what might be that same noise is heard as the ghost of the Native American disappears after Shaggy and Scooby run over the projector cable. If the producers wanted viewers to understand that the ghost effects were achieved with the projector, why didn't they include that humming sound any of the other times the ghosts disappeared? This is especially questionable here, where Captain Scavenger and his partner talk to each other before disappearing into a wall. Why would they bother creating a recording of themselves doing this when no one would be around to watch it? I'm starting to feel like Kevin Costner in JFK. The costumes get no points for originality either, as both Native American imagery and pirates have been used before. In fact, where have we seen that ghost design before? Oh yeah, it's Captain Moody from the first Don Knotts episode. Begrudgingly, the costumes deserve some credit for being scary enough to keep both the Scooby Gang and the Pussycats running away through most of the episode, despite at one point Fred and Alan heading out to catch Captain Scavenger. At least this time, the Native American villain does appear to be an actual Native American and not another white guy in brownface. Oh wait, never mind. God damn it! The lack of originality, boring color scheme, and unexplained effects that were likely more sloppy animation decisions than anything else leaves Kanna and his partner with an outfit score of 2 out of 5. This episode left me baffled by one glaring inconsistency.
Skipper, let them go if they're afraid.
No, Johnny. Without their entertaining, the Dixie Queen will never make its triumphant return. Since you failed to abandon ship, I am coming for you.
Why did Kanna try so hard to persuade everyone to stay while disguised as Captain Canopy, but at the same time try to scare everyone away while disguised as the ghost of Captain Scavenger? This might make sense if the villains only wanted to use the riverboat once or twice to transport their counterfeit currency. When they were finished, they would simply abandon the vessel and presumably make their getaway. However, at no point in the episode is there any indication that this was the plan. In fact, the sheer amount of preparation in the cave with the mechanical doors and fully equipped receiving dock would indicate this operation was meant to be somewhat permanent. Furthermore, the two ghosts kidnapped Johnny Briggs. As discussed before, whenever a Scooby villain resorts to abduction, it's always a huge mistake.
I've made a huge mistake.
When I inherited the Dixie Queen, he bought in as a partner not to restore, but to hide his secret activities. And then when I got wise, he threw me in the brig where Josie and her pals found me.
Wait, why would the Dixie Queen have a brig? That's generally for large seagoing vessels that can't easily stop at a port when a passenger or crew member misbehaves. A riverboat could simply stop at the nearest dock to unload a prisoner and wouldn't need a dedicated cell. Setting that aside, why would they kidnap Briggs? It's implied he discovered Kanna's scheme and they had to do it, but what was their endgame? They wouldn't be able to keep him trapped in the brig forever. They would either have to give up their scheme or kill him. However, the latter would be pointless because the gang and the Pussycats already knew Briggs was missing by then. So even if all the kids abandoned the Dixie Queen, they would still likely contact the authorities to let them know of Briggs' disappearance. Triggering an investigation, and the search for the missing man would almost guarantee discovery of the counterfeit money stored in the cargo hold.
Very well, but I'll suggest that you discuss my offer with your partner, Johnny. If he's ever seen again. It's okay, kids. The masquerade is over. For instance, I happen to be a U.S. Treasury agent.
The gang wouldn't have to go far because there was already an undercover federal agent around who somehow seemed to know about Briggs having gone missing. In fact, where have we seen that Lance Goodwin design before? Oh yeah, it's Gene Haltry from the second Don Knotts episode. Also, is that a clown car? Look at how big Goodwin is compared to it.
I just bought the Dixie Queen's mortgage papers from the bank. So, they'll come due in 3 days, then the boat will be mine.
Goodwin also appears later on to announce that he bought the mortgage on the Dixie Queen and would take possession in 3 days. This makes no sense whatsoever. Goodwin wasn't a wealthy gambler. He was a federal agent investigating a counterfeiting ring and knew that the riverboat and its captain were involved. Was this his plan to smoke them out, or to get unfettered access to the riverboat to search for evidence unimpeded? Hell, why bother with search warrants then? The government should just buy out the property of anyone under investigation if it's that easy. Kanna's entire operation was always going to be in danger by having an innocent man like Johnny Briggs involved. Instead of dealing with bank loans and legitimate business partners, the counterfeiter should have simply purchased the Dixie Queen outright from Briggs and not kept him on as a crew member. If he needed help running the vessel, Kanna should have looked in a dingy waterfront bar or wherever it was he found his criminal partner. I say if he needed help, but obviously the Dixie Queen would need more than just 2 members of the crew to keep it running, not to mention all the personnel needed to serve passengers. This is made blindingly apparent at the end of the episode when the gang and the Pussycats are acting as members of the crew.
All speed ahead.
Aye, aye, Skipper.
Wait. How can Valerie be here helping Briggs when we just saw her in her pussycat outfit playing with the band?
More steam! More steam!
And there goes a phony fortune up in smoke.
Wait! They're burning evidence for a criminal trial! Where the hell is Agent Goodwin? Long before the haunting, this lack of staff should have tipped Briggs off that something wasn't on the up and up with Captain Canopy. There is a way to make some sense of Canna's conflicting actions, but only if we make a few assumptions, with the first being that his goal was to keep using the riverboat in his counterfeiting scheme. He would need access to the ship while at the same time keeping as many people as possible from getting involved. He would also have to keep his innocent partner clueless as to his actions. This could explain why he tried to keep the Pussycats from leaving the ship while disguised as Captain Canopy, and at the same time trying to get rid of everyone while disguised as Captain Scavenger. The former was an act to fool Johnny Briggs, while the latter was to protect the counterfeiting ring. However, at some point this would all fall apart. If the kids stay and the riverboat is successfully repaired, Canna would be forced to hire more help, thus increasing the odds of his scheme getting found out. While James Bond villains never seem to have difficulty in finding an army of criminals willing to work for them, Scooby-Doo bad guys are seldom able to rustle up more than a handful. This means to keep the riverboat running as a tourist attraction, undoubtedly some non-criminals would need to be hired. This isn't necessarily an issue, as the only areas of the ship that need to be restricted would be the cargo hold, and as long as it's kept locked and the innocent crew members are instructed to stay out of the area, it should be fine. Most job sites have spaces that some employees aren't allowed to enter. Granted, there's always the possibility of a curious worker sticking their nose where it doesn't belong, and being open to the public would allow easier access for any investigators looking for evidence. So keeping the Dixie Queen operating as a passenger ship would be dangerous. This further emphasizes the questionable nature of Canna's use of the vessel for his scheme, especially when his innocent partner would retain full, unrestricted access to all areas of the ship, including the cargo hold. Canna absolutely should have purchased the Dixie Queen outright, but considering Briggs had inherited the boat, it's likely sentimental reasons would have prevented him from allowing Canna to take full possession. Once Canna realized he'd never completely owned the ship, he should have abandoned the idea of using it as a cover and done literally anything else. Hell, why did he even need to use a riverboat in the first place? It's unlikely they'd be offloading the counterfeit money in broad daylight, so if they were working under cover of night already, any sufficiently unobtrusive watercraft would have worked. What if we assume that this riverboat scheme was a one-time only thing and the counterfeiters were using it to transport a single big score before making their escape? This would allow for abducting Briggs, the gang, and the Pussycats. Once Canna and his partner distributed the phony currency, they could let their kidnapped victims safely go before hopping in a car and leaving the state. But if this was the case, why would they have made all of those expensive and time-consuming alterations to the cave? Installing hidden doors and a dock equipped with a large mechanical winch is not something you do for a single job. This was clearly meant to be a regular thing for Canna and his cohorts, so it's not worth considering them abandoning the Dixie Queen after the first run. I might have considered giving them a passing grade had they at least tried a little violence, but handling the gang, the Pussycats, and Briggs with kid gloves makes it obvious they were only half-assing their crime, despite all the effort put into its infrastructure. 1.5 out of 5 for the operation. This leaves the ghosts of Captain Scavenger and his offensively named co-conspirator with a final due score of 1.8 out of 5.
What was that?
Hey, cool it, gang. We were probably hearing things.
Let the gaslighting begin!
Whoops! Into the line, and we're stuck.
Wow! With that groovy old showboat to explore, who cares?
I love how whenever the mystery machine gets stuck or otherwise made inoperable, the gang never seems to care that much. I know if I drove my car on a wooden pier and one of the tires got wedged, I would be spending every spare moment trying to get it out. The space kook is scary, but nothing is more frightening than car troubles.
Maybe we can help.
We just happen to be expert ghost-chasing mystery solvers.
Whenever anyone in the gang says something along the lines of how they're expert mystery solvers or ghost chasers, I always wonder if Shaggy and Scooby know that. Those two are afraid of everything. They never want to go anywhere spooky and are almost always the ones stuck being live bait. Why do they hang around Fred, Daphne, and Velma? Is it the food? Maybe it is the food. Maybe the reason Fred, Daphne, and Velma never seem to get that upset when Shaggy and Scooby eat everything they pack for picnics is because it's a small price to pay for having a couple of patsies around to do their bidding.
And if the storm hits, the Dixie Queen will be a good refuge.
Ghosts or no ghosts?
Personally, I'll take the no ghosts.
Me too.
Me three.
Did Casey Kasem suck on a balloon before delivering that line in the booth? Alexander's scream also sounded a lot like his sister as well.
There.
Oh, Scooby, you're seeing things.
Oh, infuriating!
Yikes!
What the hell happened here? How were Shaggy and Alexander instantly replaced by the ghost like that?
We'll lock ourselves in our staterooms and post a watch.
Gee, why would you want to mail a watch? He means stand guard, Melody.
Velma has already had enough of Melody's bullshit.
Scooby-Doo, where are you?
Huh? Yikes!
Shaggy literally just turned his back to Scooby and is immediately scared that he doesn't know where Scooby is. Infants have a better sense of object permanency than he does.
The door was bolted from the inside, and Johnny was on guard. But still, something opened our safe.
I hope the Pussycats got paid in advance.
Now see what you did!
So sue me.
Scooby-Doo!
You've heard of Chekhov's gun? In the Scooby-Dooverse, it's Chekhov's water wheel. Anytime you see one, either Shaggy or Scooby had better be riding it before the end of the episode.
The skipper is going to be very happy when you tell him how you'll save the Dixie Queen by us playing a benefit gig.
At this point, Captain Canopy had allegedly left to get the sheriff. Why doesn't anyone think it's strange he hasn't returned yet? I'm not going to showcase every bad animation moment, but wow.
I don't believe it. I don't believe them.
This isn't the first time in the episode the voices of Alexander and Alexandra get switched. I wonder if it's because the names are so similar, either the wrong actor read the lines in the booth, or the animators read the wrong name in their script notes. And that's my ranking of the villains from the first set of episodes of the second season of the new Scooby-Doo movies, shown here. Just shown here because I don't have any yet from previous episodes. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I'm really glad they didn't use any ghosts from Huckleberry Finn.